Theresa May and French President Emmanuel Macron have come under fire from lawmakers for conducting airstrikes with the United States in Syria. It's both leaders' first major military action since coming to power. Now, lawmakers in both countries say the strikes could potentially add fuel to the conflict. We're joined by International Relations Associate Professor at Wits University, Dr. Malte Brosig. I hope I have that right, Doctor, and did not butcher your name. We have Theresa May this morning following criticism of these strikes, saying that they were it was legally and morally right for the UK to join the airstrikes against the Syrian regime. We have the French president also defending his actions. Do you think, seeing as this was the first involvement for both leaders of this type, that they were a bit over-enthusiastic?
I'm not sure if you can be enthusiastic if you just order an airstrike. So I don't think,
trying to claim their spot in the limelight. Yeah.
Somehow, I mean, the legal question is around us. What we know certainly is that there was no UN Security Council resolution that could, in one way or the other, sanction or legitimize the action. So that is missing. But we also know that the Security Council at the moment is not really playing the role it should play, actually, in mediating conflict and trying to stop it.
But can countries like the US, like Britain, like France, just take matters into their own hands? Never mind that the United Nations Security Council, like you say, is a bit slow in trying to act on this. But where we say that there are civilian deaths, where we don't know if there actually are the chemical weapons being used that they talk about, or where they're actually being kept, to just go ahead. You point the finger at the problem here, certainly. We as a broader public, we don't have the complete information as quick as others have. And but what we know is that in the Syrian case, there were 33 incidences where chemical weapons have been used in the past. And in 26 cases, this could actually be attributed to the Assad regime. Obviously, the question is, what kind of evidence do we have? What is available? What does the evidence actually justify? And there the problems actually start. So even if you would have like watertight proof of the use of chemical weapons, big questions can be asked that, does the airstrike actually deter the Assad regime or rebels or whoever is using these weapons? Because in the past this was actually not the case. So these chemical weapons have been used again and again. So, in your opinion, and what we've seen, what's been the fallout of this action by these countries? Are we likely to see the regime there actually now sort of ramping up its action? Are we likely to see that they're now going to try and say, if you want to do this, then we're going to fight back even harder? And of course, we're going to see the civilians caught in the middle of all of this.
It's always difficult to make predictions when we have a war going on, right? So many things can happen, so I have to be very careful. But I think that we're rather in the last end of the war. And what we know is that Assad is very determined, that he has no other option than to stay in power, actually, and will use any ways of force that he has available to stay in power. And then also the airstrikes can be a signal towards Russia and Iran that, in the post-war order that the Western countries also want to have a say.
Are we likely here, I mean, in the absence of any proof, like you say, of chemical weapons being used, are we likely to see what we saw happen in Iraq, where we had this big war, we had all of this happen, we saw Saddam Hussein being executed over all of this, but yet we're still waiting for proof?
No, there is proof. I mean, the UN inspection committee, so many of them actually in Syria, could actually prove that chemical weapons have been used.
So there is proof when it comes to Syria?
Definitely, it's 33 times, so that's quite a lot. Not in every case you can actually attribute or find the source of who.
And that's my next question. How do we know it's not being provided by somebody else, that these actually exist in Syria?
Yeah, in most cases, but in most cases we could actually say that Assad was actually using it. In other cases, it is not clear, right? So that is the situation. Has
the world, I mean, the way we've actually gone about treating the Syria situation, how badly have we fallen short in actually getting involved and fighting for the innocents in this case?
Yeah, definitely. It's a huge disappointment. Well, first of all, we should have put on the humanitarian glasses and look at the conflict from that. So we should ask,
Does the UN have enough resources to provide for refugees, for example, humanitarian relief? And the UN Security Council shows a very poor performance, so we to use many times. Obviously, you know, the Syrian case is also linked to the Libyan case, where the issue of regime change came up very quickly. But the humanitarian situation is so severe in Syria that obviously, you know, what we see is like regional and global power politics taking over. And we forget the humanitarian side too quickly, too easily.
So what needs to happen here now for Syria, for the people of Syria?
There is, unfortunately, in this kind of conflict, there is no quick fix. It's a very complex situation. If the conflict runs dry, I would say, then this depends on the one hand also on how the regional neighbors and global powers actually come to some kind of balance of issues and interests. Iran and Saudi Arabia, Russia and the US, as well as Turkey, you know, these are all big major players that prolong the conflict. Let's be clear about that. They prolong the conflict very much. So we have to stop that and then try to build some kind of post-war order. But that will be very difficult. You know, if you look at countries like Iraq or Afghanistan in the near neighborhood, we know that after a war there's a long period of insecurity, and I'm not very optimistic that Syria can escape that destiny.
It actually does get worse if we actually, like you say, look at Libya and what has happened, and it becomes chaotic and crime-riddled also after that. It's almost like we get in there and then abandon them. And
there are big question marks. I mean, even if Assad, I mean, Assad is very likely to win the war, but he is not very likely to be in that strong position he was in before the war, actually. Because there's a Kurdish environment, and there are still the Saudis who sponsor like insurgents against the Assad regime and so on. So insecurity is the most likely scenario, but we might see the war actually coming to an end or transitioning at some point in the not so distant future.
You know, always when we see situations like this, whether it was Iraq, whether it was Libya, Afghanistan, and now Syria, you have to ask, when it comes to Western powers and Western forces and their actions there, what's in it for them? You have to, there's always that question, there's always that conspiracy theory as to what do they want, why are they taking an interest?
Yeah, I mean, conspiracy theories is not really my job, so...
but do we?
Yeah, no,
do we have a right to be suspicious?
Of course. What we see is of course power politics in its purest forms. So that is, of course, and the price to pay is by the people in the country itself and in the broader neighborhoods there. I think, you know, this is more a lose-lose situation. It's become a lose-lose situation. Western powers, so far in the Syrian case, are not as influential as they have been in other situations. It's actually, you know, Russia, you know, is the key driving force together with Iran who both managed to keep Assad in power in a situation where he was very weak. But I also don't see a Western strategy at the moment. Admitting that it's very difficult to have a proper strategy, that you cannot really forecast what will happen in this kind of environment.
All right, thanks very much for that. We'll wait and see, and hopefully we're not going to see any civilian casualties now from what France and the UK have actually launched. Thanks very much, International Relations Associate Professor at Wits University, Dr. Malte Brosig.